Hello, everyone. Today we are going to talk about fear-based survival skills. What is a fear-based survival skill? Well, it's usually something we developed when we were being basically inundated with fear as young children. The truth is, we can probably almost all agree that we have a ton of fear in our systems after we've gone through complex trauma. It can almost feel like there's this consistent electricity running through our systems all the time. And honestly, we don't always know what it is. And I think to some degrees, parts, mostly like the controller, but also the karma kid to some degree, have learned to accommodate for that. They have used different survival strategies to cope in childhood. And so we don't always know we're inundated with fear, but I think a lot of us who are on this journey have figured that out. We're like, oh yeah, I didn't realize that that's what fear felt like in my system, but now I can feel it, right? That electricity running through you. That's what I'm talking about. So we developed these coping and survival strategies to deal with all this fear in our system in childhood because we were constantly scared. But then those same strategies in our adult life are pretty debilitating. They are stopping us in a lot of ways from really being able to live our lives. And I'm sure if you're here with me today, you know what it's like, you know how it feels. You have a sense of that fear in your system. So we want to talk a little bit about what some of those survival strategies are today, because understanding what they are and really being able to see them is going to help pull them out of the unconscious where they spend most of their time, so that we can actually do something about it, do something different about it than what we may have been doing before. So what I'm going to do now is talk about what are some of those strategies. And I have 3 different strategies for you today that do have a tendency to get used kind of against us, even though at one time it was probably pretty helpful in our lives. Now it's not helping us. So I'm going to talk about 3 different approaches, strategies that our defenders use to kind of work with that fear. The first one is that they take all our fear and they make it about a present day story. Now, to be fair, some of our fear may really be about a present day story. I am not going to sit here and invalidate our fears about what's going on today. They are not invalid. The problem is that we take all the fear we've had since we were very, very young, that's been piling up, and we move it onto the present moment. And unfortunately, what happens when we have a lifetime of fear that's placed on the present moment is that we really can't figure out how to focus our grounded efforts on what's happening in the present moment in some way. We have spinning the story, right? And this story, sometimes even these stories may start relatively small, but we spin the story and we spin the story and it fuels the fear in our system. And it's like this never-ending cycle where our mind is freaking out and it's fueling the fear in the body, and then the fear in the body is fueling the mind so that it freaks out. And that can be quite the never-ending cycle for us, especially if we've come out of childhood, we have complex trauma, and we don't really understand what's actually going on there, right? That's when it becomes a major issue, and we can just live in this fear cycle all the time, and that's not okay. Right? That is not a way to live. And it keeps us, as I said earlier, from being able to make grounded decisions. And we need to be able to make grounded decisions. Like, that's a very important thing for us, especially on this journey in this day and time and age that we're living in. It's really important for us to be able to ground. So if we can't make grounded decisions because all the fear that we've ever had in the body is currently spinning a story about the present day, and we're in that cycle I'm talking about, that is a survival skill. So it maybe was a little bit helpful in childhood. I mean, maybe that helped us because, let's face it, a lot of the fear was about the present day, but it isn't helping us anymore, right? It isn't helping us. And another thing I want to mention about this cycle that I'm talking about, it keeps us sort of focused on that mind story, right? So we're not really connecting with the fear in the body. And I'll be honest, that's probably true of all three of these strategies. The goal is to not connect in the body, not feel the fear that's there, and not catch the actual story that's associated with a lot of the fear. They don't want to do that because we may have repressed it. We may not want to look at it for a whole lot of reasons. So if our mind is spinning about something that's about right now, it keeps that body connection from happening. It keeps us from really connecting with what's in the body. And that is on purpose. Like, that's meant to happen. Like, that's what they want, right? So, but that, I will say, is somewhat true for all of the things I'm going to talk about today. It's not specific to that first strategy, but I do want to mention that that's a big part of it as well. So, all right, so let's talk about the next one. So what we have next is denial. And actually, this is the one that gave me the idea for this live stream. Because denial that anything is actually wrong in the present moment is coming from a fear-based strategy from childhood. We would have had to have told ourselves that denial, like that what's happening to us isn't really happening to us, or it isn't as bad as we think it is, or the people that are doing things to us aren't as bad as we think they are. Okay, this is a big denial strategy that we use to get through childhood. And I'll be honest, it can even feel pretty good. It can kind of feel like we've taken a hit of something addictive. I've noticed as I'm working through the fears that I have right now, that when I let my controller pull me into denial, I have a moment of feeling okay. Now, that okay is coming from a pretty strong dissociative numbing place. It's not really okay. But to sit in that denial, even for a few minutes, kind of feels like I'm giving myself a break. I'm giving myself a break from reality. And I think that's probably how it felt when I used this strategy as a child too. Like, this is my break. I get my break by thinking everything's just fine, right? You can kind of rest in that denial. It's like, okay, it's not horrible. It's fine. Everything is fine, right? But unfortunately, when we sit in the denial too long, look, I'm not saying we don't need a little bit of that. We may need a little bit of that. But when we sit in that denial too long, we tend to face worse problems than if we had acknowledged the problem that was initially there, right? So the denial strategy may have gotten us through childhood. And I'll be honest, I think it often does. I mean, it is sort of the basis for dissociation. It's the basis for numbing. It sometimes is the only option we have available to ourselves. But once we reach adulthood, denial does not serve us. I'm not saying we may need to rest in it sometimes just to give ourselves a break, but we do probably need to move out of that denial at some point so that we can make the adult decisions we need to make, right? So that, I think, is really key for us to understand. So I wanted to mention that. So thank you guys all for being here. If you have any comments or questions or thoughts about this particular topic, please feel free to leave them. So the last one I want to talk about today, I came up with a name for, which is control confusion. You could also use the word control illusion. And what I mean by this is a little bit complicated. Basically, making us, this particular thing, this control confusion, makes us feel like we can't control what we can control and that we can control what we can't. So it oftentimes takes control and flips it on its head and leaves us often in a place of pretty solid confusion or illusion, or maybe even delusion to some degree around this idea of control. So this one is a bit more complicated. I'm going to give you some examples of how this might work in your life. And I'm going to give you reasons why we do it, because it certainly sounds pretty self-destructive. And in truth it is, but there were reasons we did it, especially when we were younger, because if we had given up on the idea that we couldn't control almost anything, which is true as a child, that would have meant total and complete despair. So we had to believe we could control things we could not control. The problem is that keeps going in our adult lives, and we keep trying to control things we can't, while unfortunately not controlling the things we can. Oftentimes, because we moved into denial, which is why we don't. But let's talk a little bit about what this means. It often happens because the controller and the karma kid are afraid to make the changes necessary to control the things that we can't. And that's often because we have contracts associated with those things, okay? The karma kid is often trying to make sure that they don't do what they've been told not to do. And I'll be honest, a lot of things we need to do in our adult lives require us to actually do those things. This is where trauma really gets in our way and messes with us a lot. Okay, so I want to be clear about this. We will often choose to spin on things we actually rationally can't control, going back to that first one I talked about, instead of making changes we actually can. Because in making those changes, we are actually going to be moving away from contracts that we don't believe we can move away from. It could be things like making new financial decisions, leaving a job we hate and finding another one, moving to another place, moving away from abusers. I mean, that's a huge one for a lot of us. Doing things we've been told we can't do. Maybe starting a blog about our experiences. Once again, does that break some contracts? There's a lot of things, a lot of contracts that can get broken. Even making more money. Sometimes we even have contracts that say we're not allowed. So a lot of things we can control, we're not controlling. Because if we control those things, we will be going against whatever contracts the karma kid is still holding. And that's why when we're seeing these fear-based strategies, it can be extremely helpful to kind of work with that controller and karma kid right from the fears. Try to dig into the fears that are below the story. Now, that may not be something you could do right away. Okay, you may have to start by writing from fears that are more focused on whatever that current story is, right? But over time, as you do that and you ground, you'll be able to get at the fears that are beneath the fear, right? So the fears beneath the present story have much more to say to you, and they will often reveal things, maybe like even repressed memories. They may reveal things like where the fear originally started from, and again, they may reveal things like contracts. Contracts are a big reason we feel scared, because we feel like we're doing something we're not allowed to do when we are controlling our lives. So instead, we spin on the things we can't control and pretend that we can. Or maybe we don't pretend that we can and we keep telling ourselves we can't in kind of a hopeless sort of way, right? So this is what our complex trauma can do to us with fears. I'll tell you what, I am pushing the limits of my contracts right now, and I'm living by example. And as you may know about me, I do have a tendency to talk about the exact things that are showing up for me in my life. So this is all based on experience. So On that note, I do appreciate you all being here with me today. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for hearing what I have to say about these fear-based survival strategies, and give this some thought. Think about what might be happening in your own life that might be reflective of this, and see how it might apply to you. Are there places where you are not controlling what you can, but you are spinning on what you can't? And look for what's beneath that, because usually there's something is beneath that. So thank you all so much, and I look forward to talking to you next week, and I will see you all then. Thank you.